panel discussion this afternoon about accessibility issues, solutions, and challenges. Joining me is my boss, the director of the IDEA shop at Boise State. IDEA stands for Instructional Design and Educational Assessment. We work closely with faculty to help them use technology in effective and efficient ways. And I've invited some folks to join us today to talk about what's going on at their campuses, about accessibility, and in particular what response to the issues raised by accessibility, information accessibility, have been going on at their campuses. So we'll have an informal discussion this afternoon. We've already started that discussion I have with the people joining us on the stage. I asked them in email a few weeks back to think about a few questions. What initiatives are going on at your campus to integrate electronic accessibility with teaching and learning? What challenges or opportunities has that given rise to? What has emerged as a result of these initiatives? How are faculty responding to these initiatives? A key, crucial question that I'm interested in hearing more about. And I asked them to reflect as well on how we can move from a transactional, case-by-case approach to accessibility that focuses primarily on providing accommodations to individual students and move toward or complement that response or that service with a more universal, a more concerted effort to incorporate the principles of universal design for learning so that those are infused into course design and into the curriculum as a complement to that of providing accommodations for individual students. So to kick things off, those are the questions that we've been kind of bouncing back and forth via email, and I've extracted some things that piqued my curiosity for some follow-up questions today with these folks, but I'll ask you all to begin by introducing yourself, the institution you represent, and who you work for and what you do there. You can just go ahead and pull that up and stand if you want.
Good afternoon. My name is Christine Bauer. I'm the Assistant Director of the eCampus Center, and so I oversee the Instructional Design Services Unit at Boise State University.
Hello, my name is Randy Stamm. I'm the eLearning Coordinator at Idaho State University.
Thank you. I'm Betty Miller. I'm with the School of Nursing at Boise State University. I'm the Online Faculty Technology Manager.
I'm Amy Vecchione at Albertsons Library, Boise State University, and we oversee the website and emerging technologies there.
My name is Aaron Page. I'm an accessibility specialist from the University of Montana. I spend quite a bit of my time working with our department, Online, on the accessibility of our LMS Moodle. I also do some workshops and trainings with Marlene Zentz. I also am responsible for doing software accessibility evaluations.
And I'm Marlene Zentz with the University of Montana. I'm Senior Instructional Designer for Online and Accessibility Specialist, working with my colleague, Aaron.
One of the things in your email response, Marlene and Aaron, that kind of piqued my curiosity was a mention about accessibility technology services. Is that correct? A department on your campus? And the fact that you were the only of the respondents who referred to having put into place a university-wide policy governing information accessibility. So could you tell us a little bit about ATS, right? Accessibility Technology Services, and what that is composed of on your campus and what role it serves?
Aaron, you take that one.
Okay, so yeah, I spend 30 hours a week of my work is actually done in ATS. The other 10 hours is with Online and the LMS. So at ATS, we have several different tasks that are now integrated into ATS. So we provide the captioning services for our campus. We have an application we've purchased called DocSoft. So any instructors who want to record their lectures can create a voice profile in DocSoft, and then using a Camtasia relay, it will actually automatically send the recording to DocSoft, where it will be processed using the instructor's profile, and captions will be generated for it. We also do document remediation, so alternative formats, tagging PDFs is handled by ATS. We have a few students, employees that deal with manual captioning for things like commercial content to which the captions aren't already available. And then there's also me taking care of the software accessibility evaluations. And so whenever a piece of software is being considered for purchase, we have a request form on our IT site. They simply fill that information out. That ends up going to me, and then I perform an evaluation of it using screen reading software.
So our policy, to get back to that other information about the policy, we also have an electronic and information technology accessibility task force. And that task force spent 2 years writing our EITA policy and procedures. So that's in place, and that's that ATS and Online really operate fully in compliance with that policy.
Mm-hmm. Right. Thank you. Joining us is Wendy Turner, who is the director of our Disability Resource Center at Boise State. And so she'll share with us some of the insights that have come to her from that position. A couple of you folks in the email conversation we had going mentioned Quality Matters and the Quality Matters rubric in particular. I think Randy and Christine both mentioned that. Could you both tell us a little bit about what sort of guidance, support, wisdom you received from that document and how it is incorporated into course design and course production?
I'll go ahead and start out. Well, we adopted Quality Matters probably a year or two ago, and looking at Standard 8, which is really focusing on accessibility, and that's been really the driving factor in our part of not only course design, but also the idea of, hey, how many of our courses, how much of our content is accessible? And how do we start letting our faculty know? How do we support them with it? How do we work with our disability services and supporting what they're doing with supporting the faculty? So it's all kind of layered in a sense that that driving Standard 8 in the Quality Matters rubric is really the driving force in the accessibility knowledge and driving force of that.
So I would concur with everything that you just said. I mean, that's applicable for us too. So we also use the Quality Matters rubric for online course design, and we use that as a framework to here are the best practices for designing an online course. And so when the rubric was updated, we had specific training to have instructors. We do have our own peer review process internally at Boise State. But when the rubric was updated, we also provided some additional training for those peer reviewers, not only on the rubric, but specifically on Standard 8 itself. We found that that was a great opportunity to increase awareness and even kind of deepening some of the knowledge and skills related to accessibility. So that continues to be a pivotal point for us and for my team as instructional designers as they're working with faculty who are designing online courses. Standard 8 becomes a conversation point where we can talk specifically about the importance of accessibility, the need to be able to design the course up front as accessible as possible, and to provide as much support and resources surrounding that so we can assist the faculty member with that.
What I hear you saying toward the end of there, Christine, is that it's a useful educational tool in dealing with faculty, that it provides a common language for talking about accessibility and provides a rationale and a guide to best practices. All of you in the email conversation we had talked about the need to educate faculty and cited that sometimes as a challenge and an opportunity at the same time. Why don't we talk about some of those challenges and opportunities? What's this one?
I'll start from the disability services side. Faculty are overwhelmed. Faculty view access as something that one person needs, not everybody can benefit from. So when we start talking to faculty and they're like, oh my gosh, I've got to caption videos, it's like, well, think about it. You're already done. You've done it. We'll help you with it. There's resources on campus, and you use those videos again, and you're done. You don't have a student who's deaf or hard of hearing coming up saying, I need all this stuff done. And it's just kind of like this little aha moment. It's like, oh, it does put a more emphasis on the beginning of the semester or pre-semester to get things organized. But once I've done that, then the accommodations that a student might need who come through our office are individualized for that particular person. They don't have 10 people that they see, oh, everybody needs accommodations, and it's kind of just set it up and let it go. So reducing the panic is probably the one thing we try to work with faculty on.
Other thoughts about educating faculty? Marlene, I think I recall that you referred to educating faculty about accessibility being a civil right and using that as a sort of entree into the conversation. And we're starting to see, I've seen that that analogy or that sort of citation more and more frequently. Can you talk a little bit about accessibility as a civil right?
Yeah, I think when accessibility is viewed as just, I need to do this, I need to do that, it's overwhelming to get to all these tasks. There's a lot of pushback, but when you talk to faculty about the fact that equal educational opportunity is a civil right, they turn around and they start to listen, because I find that faculty want to do the right thing. They just are overwhelmed, and I really agree what was said earlier about that. I think faculty really need education about the spirit of the law. A lot of faculty think that they still don't need to make their courses accessible unless they have an identified student from DSS in their class. So the spirit of the law now is that all education should be accessible. It shouldn't have to be retrofitted. And we really have to talk to faculty about universal design for learning versus retrofitting. Retrofitting is not the spirit of the law anymore. The law has changed, and we have to move into designing open educational environments where all students can have an equal seat at the table.
Other thoughts about educating faculty?
I would just like to add that I'm glad we're using the term UDL more than accessibility, because that gets to that bigger picture. It's the right thing to do. It's not a retrofitting and a to-do list. Oh, accessibility, check, check, check. It's more of a concept that we're sharing with faculty to build their classes with that in mind from the beginning. So I think it's a really good connotation to say UDL versus accessibility.
I'm currently working to put together a faculty learning community around the issues of accessibility and universal design for learning. We're just getting that part of our initiative started, but it's based on a quotation that I can't remember whom to cite, but it goes something like this, that universal design for learning and ensuring accessibility isn't just the right thing to do, it's profoundly the right thing to do. And followed up by the observation that where else do we so often get a chance to make other people's lives greatly improved and significantly better by just doing our jobs a little bit better? And that kind of resonated with me, and I've chosen that as a sort of theme for this faculty learning community, that we're going to do some small things to do our job a little bit better that have some significant consequences in the lives of others. You spoke a little bit about that, Amy, about a couple of things, that the way you finding an ebook version of a textbook is met by the student that you're serving. And you mentioned something as well about what's needed is more success stories, more models.
Yes, absolutely. So one of the biggest challenges that we have, which is not related to faculty, is working with vendors, because in the library, we work with about 300 different vendors who supply information in various formats. So one of the things that happens is that they will have to use an ebook for their class, and if somebody can't access that ebook for some limitation that is beyond their control, that affects everybody. As it turns out, those products tend to not be accessible to everybody that's trying to access them. And to me, that relates to user experience design. If it's frustrating to use a product and most of the students don't want to use it, and it limits other students, then we should probably try to choose a different vendor. And we've had to go a kind of backdoor route to try to get those things. So what will happen is the student will request an ebook from us that is in a PDF readable format that works with their apps, because we have to deal with DRM. You're all familiar with the woes of DRM and digital rights management. When it comes to ebooks, it's so hard. They can't use accessible and open e-readers to read these ebooks. So we'll request the PDF in DRM-free formats, and what the students say is, "Oh my God, I'm so excited! I can't believe I got this ebook from you guys." And we can't believe it sometimes either, because the vendors are often so difficult to work with. And that's our biggest challenge that we have. I would love to have more stories like that to share so that it's more widely known. We have a lot of success stories and limitations that we run into. I would love to just start having that as a discussion point so that people can see, oh, this is actually a problem, not a theoretical issue.
What we're hoping to do with the Idea Shop, too, is scare up those stories about the benefits that accrue to other students who don't have a disability, but nonetheless benefit from accessibility and universal design for learning. A mother who has a very young, an infant who she just put down for a couple of blessed hours of sleep, she hopes, and now can read the captions on a caption video rather than playing the audio version as that video plays, is a benefit accruing to a lot of students from universal principles of universal design for learning. I suspect that you're the only one who has any problem with vendors, though, Amy, because I didn't hear that from anybody else. And you've got it all figured out, haven't you, Wendy?
But it's interesting because you talk about vendors. Right now, we're in the middle of evaluating different web conferencing tools. And now we're adding this whole component of accessibility to the technologies that we're evaluating. And it's interesting what kind of comments and feedback we get from vendors. And there are some that are open to it, and there are some that are completely against it. I mean, not saying it that they're against it, but just, well, that's not a priority for us. So, and at that point, we have to decide, well, if that's a priority for us as an institution, then you're not part of the vendors that we need to evaluate. And it's a different way of thinking and looking and evaluating technology now than I think we have in the past. I mean, even 5 years ago, I think it's a change for us.
It certainly it raises the bar in many ways. It adds a new standard that vendors ignore at their peril, I would suspect, and it becomes quite an intricate negotiation session.
I would like to follow up on that question, actually, and I'm sure you have something to add. So one of the things that Learning Technology Solutions at Boise State discovered, and I wasn't present for this, but I can imagine because I've seen similar things happening, where you get the VPAT, which describes whether or not to what extent a product is accessible, and then you get actual users with disabilities, and particularly blind students, using this, and it's completely incorrect. So I'm wondering about how all of you navigate the gap between the VPAT and the actual accessibility of these products.
Ooh, I was just going to say something about that. That's one of the best learning experiences for faculty, actually, is to have, you get this form back and they don't know what it is. We say, because it's good. But one of the people in our office who's blind and a user of assistive technology says there's a big difference between something being accessible and usable. So it technically is accessible. I forget what it was. It was some product that a publisher put out, and you could turn on the accessibility button, but it was this teeny tiny little button up in the corner that even if you could see, it took somebody 15 minutes to find it, and then you push the button and all the accessibility features turned on, and they weren't the greatest thing in the world either. But that's a great demonstration for faculty who are considering purchasing something to say, well, let's see if we can get a demo and then have somebody actually drive it using different types of technology.
That was something I heard at more than one presentation. Marlene and Aaron and I were at the Seaside conference a couple of weeks ago in San Diego, and that was something I heard more than once, was the idea that focus on usability and accessibility follows in its wake, right? Almost takes care of itself. Aaron, anything you want to contribute from the perspective of a software tester and the person who is actually assessing these things for usability?
Sure. So yeah, I would definitely agree with the statement about VPATs. I actually heard a really prominent person in the accessibility community named George Kirscher. He actually refers to them as V-jokes because they're so horribly unreliable, and most of the time they don't have very useful information. And I would say probably 95% of the time, the testing results we get when we actually evaluate it don't jive with what we're seeing in the VPAT.
Tell us what we're talking about right there, because it's a phrase that's not familiar to me and it might not be familiar to some
So
folks.
a VPAT is a voluntary product accessibility template, and there's an actual form of it provided by the U.S. State Department, and it outlines a product's compliance with 508. And so it has items in it like, are all the functions operable with the keyboard? And so there will be a criteria, a results, and then comments field provided for it. And there's several different categories contained within the VPAT. And so at our process, we always will request that VPAT from the vendor, but we will always also test that software manually using a screen reader to see, you know, is this kind of matching up with what we're told in that VPAT. There was also the comment made about kind of a separate accessible view that I just kind of wanted to mention on too. Mention a separate accessible view at an accessibility conference like CSUN and you'll get booed off the stage. There's a lot of products out there that will use a separate accessible view as kind of this stopgap measure. And really you're talking about separate but equal at that point. You're saying everybody else go here and anybody who uses assistive technology go here. And most of the time when a setup like that is in place, the functionality provided in the accessible view is far more limited compared to what's in the full feature version. And then there was also the comment made about usability and accessibility. That happens a lot. I completely agree with the idea that usability and accessibility are two different things. It is very possible to be accessible and compliant and meet all the standards and not be a usable product. You see that quite a bit. In particular, I would cite Google Docs as an example of that, where it's very well documented in terms of accessibility. There's lots of keyboard commands for it. It is completely not intuitive if you're an actual assistive technology user to use it.
I find it amusing that as soon as you said a separate accessible view, the first thing popped into my mind was separate but equal facilities. It just had that sort of trigger. Marlene, you wanted to say?
Yeah. The idea of segregation is just a huge thing that we really try and get away with. Just to put in a good word for vendors, with our major vendors, the people who are providing our learning management systems, our web conferencing systems, those major systems, we can't just say, you know, your product is inaccessible. We actually approached Moodle Rooms, our vendor, and said, you know, the forums in core Moodle are inaccessible. They've been reported to the Office for Civil Rights. We need to work together to create an accessible forum. And we have created an international collaboration now. Moodle Rooms and the University of Montana started it to improve the accessibility of core Moodle and Moodle Rooms. And we're having a fun time. You saw that at the conference at CSUN. We present with them. We're always on Skype with them. They're asking us questions. We're providing them with good usability feedback. We're helping them design products that are born accessible, which is very different from products that have to be retrofitted because their VPATs just don't live up to speed. So we really feel that vendor collaboration is really critical for us to engage in, especially with learning management systems. Those are complex systems, and they really need our input from the education field on how to create products that work for us. So just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. Betty, can you tell us a little bit about how easy and simple it is to conduct an accessibility audit for a program?
It's easy to say, but actually it can be relatively easy to audit an online course. For our program, we have all of our courses in the master course site, so that lets us at the department level be able to look at a course, its layout, and its materials. But I just want to say that once you do run an audit on accessibility and usability, you're definitely going to get a snapshot of what you need to fix. And the fixing is very time consuming. So for example, we're closing in on 5 years of fixing our courses. And with that being said, the audit's very important because like anything, you have to know where you're going, what your to-do list is, and plan for it. Plan for it with labor of staff, plan for it with job descriptions of what type of people you want to hire. So audits are simple to do, Kevin, but they take a lot of work to bring to a conclusion.
We were recently experimenting with site improvement.
Okay, that's what we use, sort Site 5.
And I suggested to one of my colleagues to go ahead and point it at the sites that I'm responsible for. But if you find it, you fix it.
Yes.
So if the links are broken, thank you. Tell me about it, but you get to fix them. A lot of what we're talking about when we talk about accessibility, whether it's captioning, transcriptioning, making documents available in a variety of formats, comes down to some serious investment of time and labor. I know many of you are working either with student workers, part-time employees, or even full-time employees. Let's talk a little bit about what unique challenges that might pose. Maybe working with student workers is the same, whether they're working on accessibility or they're shelving books in the library. I don't know. Are there unique challenges to retaining student workers or finding the staffing necessary to get some of this work done?
I'll just add on for our staff and faculty, it all begins with education, again, about what the major concept is, and that number one, our program believes in this. We want to have a high quality program. So whether it's a student, staff member, or faculty, it's basically explaining the concept that we want to build the best course possible that's usable and go from there. And that takes a village of talking to people, attending webinars, reading different literature, but keeping the conversation alive. And I feel really fortunate at Boise State that we have a great conversation happening. And I feel we've had a conversation for a good 2 years where we're coming together with eCampus, the library, the idea shop. But that's the biggest challenge, is making people aware of it. But once they understand it, I feel they feel dedicated and they want to do what they can.
What's that? Yep. Randy, you had something about?
I think one of the challenges that I faced, so when I came in as director of the Idea Shop in February 2015, I made the mistake of mentioning that I'd worked at UC Davis on their electronic accessibility initiative. And they're like, oh, good, well, you can head this up on campus then on top of your regular job. And and I have hit barrier after barrier. Just part of it is my own inability to balance my workload in such a way that accessibility can be prioritized. Another issue, and I'd love to hear if other people at other universities have run into this, is that when I assembled like a small working, like a steering committee to head up some different working groups working on different issues, the people in that committee were fairly high ranking, but all of them insisted on floating every decision we made up the chain. Like, well, before I can tell my people that they need to do this, we need to get approval from the provost, the president, the vice president, all these kinds of things. And to me, that's been a real sticking point. And so I'm wondering if people either at Boise State, if you have other experiences, or at other universities have had that same kind of issue, and where the charge from accessibility comes, at what level that comes besides it's the right thing to do and it's the law.
Well, I think, go off of what you were saying, I think one of the issues that we run into too is just the faculty feel like it's the institution's responsibility to do this and that they shouldn't be tasked with it. So they look to disability services to do it. And that can be problematic too because of staffing and lack of resources. And we've actually changed one of our positions to be this disability services liaison, and is now responsible for hiring students, captioning and videos, and supporting disability services with user accounts for all the courses in Moodle to gain access to that to make these courses accessible. But again, these are courses that we have students that have reported a disability, self-reported, and it's really not addressing any of the others. And as far as the administration, yeah, I don't think it's going to be important to them until we get a lawsuit or there's something that happens that is going to make it a priority. Otherwise, we keep doing what we do with what the resources we have.
I just would like to mention, we did get an OCR complaint in 2012. We were working hard on accessibility, but that got the attention of upper-level administration, and we provided training to administrators. The president now talks about civil rights on the ADA celebration days. The provost supports what we're doing, and that's really, really helped a lot to have that. What we did as an EITA task force is that we emphasized that accessibility is a shared campus responsibility. And we use that phrase intentionally in the policy and procedures, and as we rolled out the policy to the Senates around campus, so that because people kept thinking it was a DSS issue, it wasn't a shared campus responsibility. So that's one way that we have really worked to address that. We love to work with students, and sometimes professors invite us into their classes, teacher education classes, psychology classes, to present on accessibility to them, so that we're starting to graduate students who understand an accessible electronic environment. So touching on a few issues there, but I think it's really important to help educate our student population, not just faculty and staff and administrators.
I think that's a powerful idea, the idea that it's a university-wide shared responsibility. Because in many, many instances, folks are saying, that guy over there, that tag, you're it. It's your problem, not mine. Amy.
Along those lines with the training, I think it's important to recognize that not everyone has ever had experience using a screen reader software. And that's a really easy baseline thing to do, is provide training. We've done that a few times in the library, and most recently did that for all of the folks who run websites across the entire campus. And that's not my job, but it is something that our web developer in the unit that I work in had experience with, and we empowered her to do that and take the lead. She partnered with Mike Gibson, who works with Wendy Turner in the Disability Resource Center, and he led a really great walkthrough on how JAWS functions. We taught all of our public service staff members how to activate JAWS on any of the public terminals in the library computer labs. And that was something that people simply had never done before. It's important to recognize that as a baseline and just say, we're going to start here, and we're going to give you this baseline comfortable understanding of kind of what we're talking about. And since then, we've been able to make some changes in the university web template as a result of that, just by bringing about awareness to the issue and having people say, oh, there are some small things that I can actually do I didn't realize I could do, and I didn't realize how I was impeding accessibility.
Could I add something to that?
Absolutely.
So in the trainings that Marlene and I do, we always do it with a 2-screen setup. If you guys stick around with our next section, you actually will get to see us doing that in action. And so we always focus on a few key principles to making documents, courses, and websites accessible. But then we actually demonstrate why these principles matter to somebody like myself that uses a screen reader. So we demonstrate, okay, if you don't have headings in your syllabus, look at what I have to do, mashing the down arrow key to get to this one specific section of your document. Or if you put in a non-descriptive link, listen to how long it takes for my screen reader to read out this nasty long YouTube URL that you pasted into your document. I think that people respond really well when they get to actually see why it matters to do these things. And another thing that we really try and do in our workshops is we try and show them how making your documents can actually make them better for everybody, not just your assistive technology users, and in a lot of cases save you a lot of time. Simple things like using heading styles in Microsoft Word to apply your fonts and formatting. That makes a document accessible with heading structure. It also saves you a lot of time of manually highlighting and bolding and italicizing and adjusting your text. And so those are a couple of points that we really try to emphasize in our trainings.
There's a reason that headings and subheadings are used to chunk and queue information, right?
Yep.
There's good justice. Betty's nodding because she was a former tech writing student of mine in another lifetime. But there's a reason why we have these sort of navigational tools at our disposal already. You also reminded me of something that I had one of those moments where what I had just heard was so obvious, I wondered how I ever lived to be the age that I am, being this dumb to the world around me. The comment was, we're talking to faculty about headings and the ability for screen readers to navigate through documents when most of them have never seen a screen reader in action. And it was like, well, yes, meet them where they are. Be sure you're starting at the right spot, I guess, is the takeaway for me, because if they've never seen a screen reader in action, all that good advice about headings and so on is less than useful. You had a question earlier, sir?
Yeah, actually, it was for you. I was just wondering, because, if we had to went back to our universities and said, yeah, we want to start a small group that's going to work on implementation and kind of growing these things, what reasons did they give you for saying they wanted to send everything up to the president and the provost? Because how do you get past that? I mean, I can imagine that'd be incredibly frustrating. Were they afraid of something as a legal issue, or what reasons did they give you?
The implication, and it wasn't necessarily made explicit, was that we ourselves are not powerful enough to launch this initiative. I would beg to differ with that, because the people who are in this small group are actually very high-level people. And what my supervisor, Susan Shadle, director of our Center for Teaching and Learning, said, okay, so what we want is we want people who are high enough that they can make people do things, but not so high that they don't report to somebody else. Right. And so we were kind of aiming for that level. But I think part of it is, this is going to be a huge amount of work. And so we want to be sure that we get approval from our higher ups before we launch into this. It's a little frustrating.
We have just a few minutes left, a little under 10 minutes or so. So are there other questions from the audience? Other thoughts that you would like to share?
I'm just curious, the folks here at other institutions, how many are either in the process of working on an accessibility policy or have one?
Oh, fantastic.
And how many have one compared to working on it? So how many have one in place, working? Kind of working. Okay. And how many are working on it? Okay. And we're in the same stage right now. We're working on one. I'm afraid that the process it goes back to having everyone check off on it and making sure that it's what everyone agrees on, and how much responsibility goes back on the individuals that have to support it. And I think my worry is that we're going to be sitting there for 2, 3, 4 years before we have a policy everyone can agree on to have in place, and by then maybe it's too late.
Wendy, do you remember who it was that did that series of webinars? It must have been within the last year, that was on authoring accessibility policy. You hosted them. But I know there are many people who, I don't know if anyone else knows which group I'm talking about. We can find out. Anyway, another question here. Sorry.
I'd just like to, could I just respond to Randy about policy? If you're writing policy, we started out by researching what other universities were doing. This California State University system has all of their policies and procedures online. We contacted them. We're colleagues with them now. We've looked at Penn State. Our policy is at umt.edu/accessibility. You can look at what we did and how we assigned responsibilities to people. But look around, there's all kinds of information. And if you go to major accessibility conferences like Accessing Higher Ground or CSUN, you're going to find all kinds of wonderful people to network with. They're a great community out there. And we think it's a good thing to take a lot of time to write a policy. That generates a lot of conversation. And you don't want to write the policy overnight. And as long as you're in the process and you're having the dialogue, that's where you need to be. Accessibility is a journey. A policy is part of that, I think. Not all campuses feel the need for a policy, but it really is important to have real thorough, deep conversations about those issues. Thanks, Wendy.
So just really quick, I'm sure that everybody has run into the same type of situation. Starting a couple of years ago, attending various conferences, we started having the conversation about accessibility and the need to start pushing this. And so I had to start the Ground Roots campaign to try to push it up the channels and try to get some approval. And of course, then everybody's like, well, yeah, it's great to have, but who's going to pay for the resources to do this? Because we did have to retrofit and start our way backwards. And we came to the conclusion that we needed to start somewhere and move forward. And so now they have, through our Teaching and Learning Technologies office, some support to do that. But with each individual school and college on campus still kind of doing their own thing to a degree, tapping into those shared resources continues to be that challenge, and therefore writing the centralized policy to support and manage the accessibility is also part of that challenge. And so I'm sure that everybody's running it. I've got lots of nodding heads, so everybody's running into the same kind of a process. And then the question really is, well, okay, how do we do that? How do we bring an institution together to create a single centralized policy and then provide resources that really can be utilized by an entire institution and not have everything siloed?
This question could be one word, and it's YouTube. And I can give you a little bit more background. I'm moderating a panel on YouTube educational videos this summer, and its impact in higher education. And it's hard enough to get, say, captionings for people to caption a YouTube video, never mind add, say, descriptive audio to a YouTube video. Yet we have this tidal wave of educational video coming to us now through YouTube and other social mediums. And a lot of instructors simply look to these videos and say, well, look, here's a video on quantum mechanics. I'm just going to use this one. I'm going to refer all my students to it. So very broadly, opinions or views on YouTube video, how it's impacting what you're doing and how you're dealing with it?
In the DRC, we've got several students who are deaf, so we're focusing just on the classes, and YouTube seems to be the thing to do these days. So our deaf services coordinator has we have our own YouTube channel. If the professor's created it, she becomes linked to their YouTube channel. She'll go in and either send out to have their created video captioned and sent back, or we'll do it if it's really short. But a lot of what we do, and then we tell professors afterwards, is if we don't have permission or they just grab something off, there's a whole permission process to use it to begin with. We let the professor deal with that. And then we do an overlay. So it's actually a different video link that the student who uses the captions, which unfortunately is not available to the rest of the class. But that's part of that conversation. Martin Luther King, I had a dream speech. Okay, there's a bazillion of them. Let's go and we'll help you look for one that's already captioned. How about that? And then they're like, oh, we can? It's like, yeah, you can. So it goes back to educating faculty and saying if you're going to use it, it needs to be accessible. If you're going to create it accessibly, we can help you. If the one you have isn't accessible, go and search and find one that is. If it's absolutely nothing out there that's already accessible, then let us know and we'll help you create something.
I just want to add about YouTube. From my experience, recent experience, the past 2 years, we have videos that are excellent videos. We want to close caption. We will close caption it for that author. Once we track down the author to ask for permission, which is usually through YouTube, actually posting to that page, many times the author said, I had no idea that I posted this with a standard YouTube license. from this point forward, I will be, cogent that there are Creative Commons licenses that I can apply to my video. So it was just very surprising that across the nation, talking with people this year and them telling us that we made the video, we wanted it to be educational, we had no idea we were posting it without a Creative Commons license, and then they're very excited and we walk them over the phone on how to repost it. And then we go on with our process of having it closed captioned, and then we send those files back to the author. So that would just be one thing. If you're posting to YouTube, think about how you're posting your materials.
This is a quick question for you, Randy. I know that ISU is evaluating different web conferencing tools, lecture capture tools, and that sort of thing. Are you looking for the sweet spot of which vendor can provide you at no cost closed captioning services? Because right now, my institution, we use a product, Echo 360. Any capture that has to be produced or is produced should theoretically be captioned, but it's not, because that is on a price basis per lecture capture. I know exactly how much it costs, but like you, I've heard we're just kind of going, well, unless somebody really needs it or really asks for it, we're not going to do it because we're not budgeted for it. So I'm wondering, in your evaluation, you're looking for that vendor who can do that for you at no cost.
Well, some of it at no cost. Yeah, definitely. We're always looking for the vendors that provide that service, or if they have a service that they use and they can offer a suggested service. Other ones, in some cases, you have the setup with closed captioning where they have an interpreter that the institution selects and goes in and captions for you as you're in that synchronous environment. The question may be better for what do we do with the videos if they're recorded in a web conferencing solution, and we're archiving them and reusing them, and then we're having to figure out how to capture them. But I mean, we're definitely looking at all those options and services. The problem is that you get such a mishmash of different options from the different vendors that it's apples and oranges when you're comparing. And that can be a little frustrating too, because you think you got the right product, but when it comes to accessibility, it may not be the right product. So it's a little frustrating. So I don't know if I really answered your question, though, but
as we start our process, because when you say before you do the right thing, right? Yes. Keep your don't wait to decide.
Right.
Just, can I say one quick thing? Is that we like 3Play Media for the captioning that we do for items that we're primarily going to caption things that are unique items that don't already come with captioning. Faculty seem to be drawn to independently published videos. Those things, they never thought to do that, so we obtain permission from them, but we can't simply host them on YouTube because they're proprietary content, so we use 3Play Media and host them on an internal server with those captions. And so that's why we've chosen to go that way, because a lot of people like to think they can just make their own captions for things, but that doesn't really work in that kind of environment. We like to pay, and it's really not that expensive. And I've been able to fight for a budget for that at my library.
And not only that, but even if we find something that's captioned, we find a lot of times that it's not really captioned properly. And so verbatim words that are used may not really appear or not being said in the video. So now you're having to backtrack and you need to recaption something because it wasn't done right in the first place.
Absolutely. Well, we're out of time, folks. I want to be mindful of your schedule. I want to thank you for your time and attention this afternoon. And please help me in thanking this panel for sharing their time and expertise with us. Thank you. Thank you.